So in the last video we explored the easy morph section, and in the video before that we had our first little look at expert mode. In this video we're going to return to expert mode and we're going to get a bit better acquainted with these operators. So we already know that we can turn an operator on or off by right clicking it, or control clicking if you're on a Mac and you're using a one button mouse. And we know that we can route the audio from any operator to the output just by clicking and dragging directly underneath it on this light grey bar. And we know that we can pan it left or right by clicking directly underneath it and dragging on this dark grey bar. And we know that we can route any operator into another operator to modulate the frequency of that operator just by clicking the adjacent square on the grid. So this is the operators page. This gives us a kind of general overview of all our operators, and each operator also has its own page which we can access either by clicking on that operator in the FM matrix or by clicking on that operator here in the navigator. So here we can change the ratio of our operator. And remember, the ratio is the fundamental frequency times whatever, so times 2 or times 3 and so on. When that's a round number like 1 or 2, it's going up in even harmonics. But if we alter that by smaller increments after the decimal place, the result is a lot less harmonic. It's not so bad if it's only detuned very slightly. But the further away from even harmonics we get, the more kind of discordant it sounds. We also have an offset here that offsets the frequency in hertz by an amount that we can specify. So how is that different to just detuning the ratio? Well, the most important difference is that when you're offsetting the frequency, the lower down the keyboard you get, the more extreme the detuning will be. And you'll be able to hear that if I route A into the output instead of into F, and we can hear them playing together. See, that differentiation, that detuning, becomes more extreme the further down the keyboard we go. On this high C here, it's barely noticeable, but you go down an octave, yeah, that's a little bit detuned. Go down an octave more. So when you go up the keyboard in notes, the difference in frequency from the last note to the next note becomes greater and greater exponentially. So because these frequency values are getting exponentially higher and higher, taking away 30 Hz like we're doing now becomes less and less important. It makes less and less of a difference. Now don't worry if you don't really get the maths of it. It doesn't really matter if some of what I said kind of went over your head a bit, as long as you remember that offsetting the Hertz in either direction is going to make a bigger difference in the lower part of the keyboard and a smaller difference the higher up the keyboard you get. So that's offset. I'm going to route this back into F. Here in the waveform section, we can invert the waveform. We can turn on keysync mode, which means that every time we play a new note, the waveform cycle restarts. And we can turn off or on pitch envelope, which if we turn it off just kind of exempts it from being affected by this pitch envelope. And we're going to talk about the pitch envelope in the very next video when we look at envelopes. And of course in the waveform section we can choose a different waveform. Now this is quite significant because when FM synthesis was first invented, all the operators only produced sine waves. But in FM8, we can choose from a variety of different waveforms. And obviously changing the shape of a waveform that you're using to modulate another operator drastically changes the sound. And these controls we've just looked at, the ratio, the offset, the waveform stuff, that's all on the ops page. So we can change that stuff from there as well. Often I tend to just go on the ops page and turn key sync on for everything. And we've also got a velocity control for each operator. So if I turn that up for operator A, the amount of frequency modulation that's going to operator F will be greater or less depending on how hard or soft I strike the keys, because the velocity is affecting the amplitude of operator A. And that's very important because it potentially adds a lot more kind of expression to the sound. We've also got on our operators page a pan knob which performs the same function as clicking down there. By the way, don't bother trying to pan an operator if it's only routed into another operator, because it's not actually audio that this operator is producing, it's just modulating the frequency of that one. So we can pan this, and it makes no difference. Glad we got that sorted out. So here we've got our amp mod section, and I'm not really going to talk about that now because we're going to cover the whole modulation matrix as well as these amp mod sections on our operators in a future video. And envelopes as well we're going to cover in the very next video, so I'm not going to talk about those right now. So yeah, one of the things I haven't mentioned yet, but which is supremely cool, is that not only can these operators modulate each other, they can actually modulate themselves through feedback. If you click above an operator and drag, it will start to feed back on itself. It's exactly the same principle as if we took two operators with exactly the same settings, E and F for example, both on sine wave, both on a ratio of 1, and modulated E with F and F with E. But we can just shortcut that process using feedback. So F's own oscillation starts to modulate its frequency. And what that does is add more and more frequencies, more and more harmonics to the sound. If we look at it in the spectrum, as I turn up the feedback, it starts to resemble a sawtooth wave. And if you go above about 40, it starts to become more and more chaotic as more and more harmonics are introduced, and it becomes pretty noisy. So that's pretty cool. And of course, if your carrier is being modulated by a modulator that's feeding back on itself, that can give you some pretty interesting timbres. You can see why FM8 is really good for sort of four-man-y talking bass sounds. Listen to that. If I go to the master and turn up the digital distortion a bit, So in essence, this is a really simple sound. It's just one operator being modulated by another operator that's the same waveform, same ratio, and the modulator is just feeding back on itself a little bit. And yet it's creating a really interesting and complex timbre. So I hope you're already sort of starting to see why FM synthesis is so powerful and exciting. Okay, we've been at this a while, so we're going to take a little break now, but don't go anywhere, because in part 2 we're going to look at operator X. So I'll see you in a bit.